Hello, and welcome back to Noir Lullaby. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that sing like a dark lullaby, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, I remember how hot it was that day. It happened last summer during one of those long heat waves when the temperature stayed high even after the sun went down. The air inside the house felt warm and still, and outside it was so thick and humid that standing in the yard for more than a few minutes became uncomfortable. The cicadas had been especially bad that summer. They filled the trees around our house, making a constant buzzing sound from morning until late at night. During the hottest part of the evening, their noise often became so loud that it was hard to hear anything else. A few nights earlier, I had walked into the living room and found my dad asleep in his favorite chair with small pieces of tissue stuffed into both ears. I laughed so hard that I nearly woke him. That night, however, there were no cicadas. I noticed their silence before anything else. The trees were completely quiet. There was no buzzing, no chirping, and almost no wind moving through the leaves. The silence should have been peaceful, but it was not. It made the house and the yard feel wrong somehow. The air also felt different. It was not simply humid or warm. It felt heavy, as though something invisible was pressing down over the entire neighborhood. I did not understand the feeling at the time, so I ignored it. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention. It was movie night at our house. We usually had one every few weeks, and I had been put in charge of getting the snacks while the rest of my family prepared the living room. My mother was setting up the movie, my father was moving the coffee table closer to the sofa, and my younger brother Jerry was gathering blankets and pillows. I went into the kitchen and began pulling bags of microwave popcorn from the cupboard. While I was standing near the counter, I thought I saw something move past the window above the sink. It was only there for a second. A dark shape passed from one side of the glass to the other, moving quickly enough that I could not understand what I had seen. I leaned closer to the sink and stared through the window. The backyard was dark, but the porch light allowed me to see the bushes below the window. Nothing was moving. I told myself that a branch or one of the bushes must have shifted in the wind, although I could not feel any wind and the leaves appeared completely still. I continued making the popcorn because I did not want to scare myself over nothing. I placed each bag into the microwave, one at a time. When they were finished, I emptied them into 4 separate bowls. One bowl was for me, one was for my mother, one was for my father, and the last was for Jerry. I added extra salt to my bowl before carefully carrying all 4 of them into the living room. Balancing them in my arms was harder than I expected. I nearly dropped 2 bowls while walking around the coffee table, but I managed to place them down safely, losing only a few pieces of popcorn onto the floor. My mother pressed play once everyone was comfortable. The movie was an old slasher film. It was the kind where a masked killer walks slowly while everyone else runs, but somehow he still catches them. The special effects looked fake, and some of the acting was terrible, but we had fun watching it. During one of the more violent scenes, I looked over at Jerry. He had pulled his blanket over most of his face and was watching through a narrow opening between his fingers. I laughed at him, and he threw a piece of popcorn in my direction. For those 2 hours, everything felt normal. When the movie ended, it was nearly midnight. We were all tired, and the house became quiet as everyone stood up and began heading toward their rooms. My mother reminded Jerry and me to brush our teeth before going to sleep. We both groaned at the same time. She gave us the look that meant she was not joking, so we agreed and went upstairs. I grabbed my phone and charger from beside the sofa before walking to my bedroom. Jerry reached the bathroom first and closed the door behind him. I returned to my room and decided to lie down for a few minutes while I waited. I placed my phone beside me and rested my head against the pillow. I did not mean to fall asleep. When I opened my eyes again, the house was completely dark. At first, I did not understand what had happened. I looked toward my bedroom door and saw a thin line of darkness beneath it. The bathroom light was no longer shining into the hallway. I picked up my phone and checked the time. It was 2 a.m. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, annoyed that Jerry had not told me when he was finished in the bathroom. He knew I had been waiting, but he had probably gone straight to his room and forgotten about me. I climbed out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The house was strangely silent. Normally, I could hear my parents' white noise machine through their bedroom door, but that night I heard nothing. Even the usual sounds of the house settling seemed to be gone. Halfway to the bathroom, a terrible smell reached me. I stopped walking and tried to figure out where it was coming from. It smelled rotten and metallic at the same time. It reminded me of spoiled meat, but there was something else mixed into it that I could not identify. I covered my nose and looked around the hallway. The smell was strong for a few seconds, then seemed to fade. I assumed something had gone bad in the kitchen trash, so I continued to the bathroom. I brushed my teeth quickly, rinsed my mouth, and turned off the light. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed that my parents' bedroom door was wide open. That was unusual. They always slept with their door closed because their white noise machine was loud. My mother said the sound helped her sleep, while my father claimed it made him feel as if he were trapped inside an airplane. The machine was not running that night. Curious, I walked closer and looked into the bedroom. At first, I could only see dark shapes. My father was lying on his side of the bed, and my mother appeared to be leaning over him. Her back was turned toward me, and her head was bent close to his face. I assumed she was whispering something to him. Maybe he had been snoring, or perhaps she was trying to wake him without disturbing the rest of us. I did not want to interrupt them, so I quietly returned to my bedroom. As I began closing my door, I saw movement in the hallway. My mother came out of the bedroom and hurried toward the stairs. The way she moved immediately caught my attention. She was not walking normally. She leaned forward slightly and took quick, uneven steps, almost as though she were trying to move without bending her knees. I opened my door again and leaned into the hallway. "Mom?" I called. "What are you doing?" She did not turn around. She reached the staircase and disappeared down it at an unnatural speed. I stood there for several seconds, listening for a response, but none came. I considered following her, but something about the way she had moved made me uncomfortable. Instead, I went into Jerry's room. He was deeply asleep in a position that looked painful. His mouth hung open, one arm was stretched above his head, and the rest of his body was twisted in the opposite direction. I pushed his shoulder until he opened his eyes. "What?" He mumbled. "I just saw Mom running downstairs," I whispered. He stared at me without answering. "She was moving really weird," I continued. "I called her, but she ignored me." Jerry blinked slowly, either trying to understand what I was saying or simply struggling to wake up. "Weird," he finally said. Then he rolled away from me and pulled his blanket over his shoulder. I stood beside his bed for another moment, expecting him to say something else, but he was already falling asleep again. I quietly left his room and went back to mine. It was close to 2:30, and I was too tired to think clearly. I closed my door, climbed into bed, and convinced myself that my mother had probably gone downstairs to get water. I fell asleep again. At around 3:15, a violent bang woke me. It sounded as if someone had kicked a door open. The first bang was followed by the sound of wood shaking against its hinges. I sat up immediately. For several seconds, I stayed frozen in bed, listening. My heart was already beating faster, although I had no idea what had caused the noise. I got up and crossed the room. I slowly turned the doorknob and opened my bedroom door as quietly as possible. For once, the hinges did not creak. I looked into the dark hallway. My mother was standing in Jerry's doorway. She was perfectly still, staring into his room. The hallway was too dark for me to see her clearly, but I could tell that something was wrong with her face. Her eyes appeared too small, like two dark beads pressed into her skin. Her mouth seemed to be hanging open. All I could see where her mouth should have been was a large black circle. A cold feeling moved through my body. I began pulling my door closed, but my hand slipped from the knob. The door snapped shut with a sharp sound. My mother's head turned toward me instantly. There was no slow reaction. 1 second, she was looking into Jerry's room, and the next her face was aimed directly at my door. I grabbed the knob and pulled the door closed the rest of the way. I no longer cared about being quiet. Heavy footsteps rushed across the hallway. My mother reached my door and began turning the knob before I could lock it. "Go to bed," I shouted. "Leave me alone." The door opened. She stepped into the room. Even in the darkness, I knew that the person standing in front of me was not truly my mother. She spoke in a voice that sounded similar to hers, but it was deeper and rougher. Each word seemed to come from somewhere far below her throat. "You are being a naughty boy," she said. I backed away from her. "What did I do?" I asked. "Why are you acting like this?" She suddenly began to cry. It was not normal crying. Her mouth opened wider, and a deep, ugly sob came out of her. She covered her eyes with both hands and shook her shoulders as if she were heartbroken. That was when I noticed her fingers. They were too long. Each finger looked stretched, almost as if the bones had been pulled apart beneath the skin. Her fingernails appeared dark and sharp. "Mom?" I whispered. "Why do you look like that?" The crying stopped immediately. She lowered her hands to her sides. Her face was turned toward me, and I finally got a clear look at it. Her eyes were not my mother's eyes. They were tiny circles buried inside the sockets. Her pupils were so large that almost none of the white could be seen. Her mouth was crooked and off-center. One side sat higher than the other, and her lower jaw hung at a strange angle. It looked as though she could not close it even if she tried. For one terrible moment, we stared at each other. Then I ran. I shoved past her as hard as I could and rushed into the hallway. I thought about running downstairs, but I knew she would catch me before I could reach the front door and unlock it. Instead, I ran into my parents' bedroom and locked the door behind me. The creature reached it almost immediately. It began pounding against the door. Each blow was so powerful that I could feel the floor shaking beneath my feet. The wood bent inward slightly every time it struck. I turned toward the bed. My father was still lying there. "Dad!" I shouted. I rushed over and grabbed his shoulder. I shook him as hard as I could, but he did not move. "Dad, wake up." There was no answer. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table and turned it on. The sight in front of me has never left my mind. The sheets around my father were soaked with blood. Half of his face had been torn away. Red flesh and broken skin covered the side of his head, and one of his eyes was gone. His tongue hung through a hole in his cheek, trapped between his teeth. The wounds did not look like anything a person could have caused. Long, sharp bite marks had torn through the skin and muscle. Some of them were so deep that I could see pale bone underneath. For a few seconds, I could not move. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My heart beat so violently that it hurt, and my vision seemed to narrow around the edges. I did not hear the bedroom door break. The creature threw itself against it with enough force to tear part of the frame from the wall. The door crashed inward, and the thing wearing my mother's face fell into the room with it. The sound pulled me out of my shock. I ran past it and raced down the hallway. It came after me. I reached the stairs and nearly fell while taking the first few steps. I grabbed the railing and continued downward as fast as I could. Behind me, the creature's feet struck each step with heavy, uneven impacts. It was close enough that I could hear its breathing. I reached the front door, grabbed the lock, and turned it. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the deadbolt back into place. The creature was halfway down the stairs when I pulled the door open. I ran outside and into the road. Our nearest neighbor lived about 200 meters away. Under normal circumstances, that was not far, but I knew I could not outrun the creature in a straight line. If I ran directly toward the neighbor's house, it would see exactly where I was going. The road was lined with thick bushes. As soon as I reached a dark section of the street, I threw myself into them. Branches scratched my arms and face as I crawled deeper beneath the leaves. I pressed my body against the ground and covered my mouth with both hands. A few seconds later, the creature ran past. I could hear its footsteps striking the road. It moved faster than any person I had ever seen. The sound disappeared down the street toward the neighbor's house. I stayed hidden for several minutes. At some point, I realized that I was crying. Tears ran down my face, and my entire body was shaking. I tried to control my breathing because I was terrified the creature might hear me. When I was sure it had gone far enough down the road, I slowly crawled out of the bushes. Instead of continuing toward the neighbor's house, I turned and went back home. I knew Jerry was still inside. The front door was standing open when I reached it. I entered, closed it behind me, and locked every lock. I checked the back door and moved through the downstairs rooms, making sure each window was closed. The silence inside the house was worse than before. That rotten smell was much stronger now. I went upstairs and entered Jerry's room. Without wasting time, I turned on the light. He woke with a jump and looked at me angrily. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Why was Mom in your room earlier?" I demanded. Jerry rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about? She was standing in your doorway. I didn't know she was there." He looked more closely at me. My face was wet with tears, my clothes were dirty from the bushes, and I was breathing heavily. "What happened?" he asked. I tried to explain everything at once. I told him that something that looked like Mom had chased me out of the house. I told him that it had attacked Dad, and that Dad was dead. Jerry stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "You're lying," he said. "I'm not. You watched that stupid movie and had a nightmare." He pushed his blanket aside and climbed out of bed. "I'm going to wake Mom and Dad up," he said. I'm going to tell them not to let you watch scary movies anymore. I stepped in front of him. Don't go in there. He tried to move around me. Jerry, I'm serious. He ignored me and went into the hallway. The moment he saw our parents' bedroom door lying broken on the floor, he stopped. His expression changed. He walked toward the room, then suddenly ran inside. I followed him. When he saw our father, he dropped to his knees and began sobbing. I grabbed him under the arms and pulled him up. Be quiet, I whispered sharply. He fought against me for a moment, but I held on to him. I don't know if that thing is coming back, I said. We can't let it know we're here. Jerry covered his mouth with his hand and tried to stop crying. We decided to hide in the basement until morning. We thought daylight might make it easier to escape or find help. Neither of us knew what else to do. We went downstairs as quietly as we could and entered the small guest bedroom in the basement. We closed the blinds over the window and locked the door. Only after we were inside did we realize that neither of us had brought a phone. Mine was still beside my bed, and Jerry's was upstairs in his room. Neither of us was brave enough to go back for them. We sat together on the floor beside the guest bed. Jerry kept wiping his face with his sleeve. Every few minutes, one of us would look toward the door or the window. Time passed slowly. It felt as though we had been hiding for at least an hour when we heard something outside the bedroom door. It was not a loud sound. It was a soft, shuffling noise, as though someone was dragging part of their body across the basement floor. Jerry looked at me. What is that? He whispered. I don't know. The sound stopped outside the door. About a minute later, a weak voice spoke from the other side. Help me. It was barely louder than a whisper. Jerry and I remained silent. We assumed it was the creature trying to trick us. It had already copied our mother's face and voice. There was no reason to believe anything we heard. Several minutes passed. Jerry turned toward the window behind us. He suddenly gasped and grabbed my shoulder, tapping it hard. I looked back. At the bottom of the closed blinds, I saw 2 feet outside the basement window. They looked like our mother's feet. Before I could react, they moved away from the window and ran toward the front of the house. Jerry leaned close to me. Do you think it heard me? He whispered. No, I said. You weren't that loud. The moment I finished speaking, a terrible scream came from upstairs. It was followed by several violent blows against the front door. The creature had returned. The entire house seemed to shake as it slammed into the entrance again and again. During the noise, I heard something else. 3 quiet knocks came from the other side of the guest bedroom door. Then the weak voice returned. Please help me. Jerry had not heard it because of the banging upstairs. I stood and reached for the doorknob. Jerry grabbed me and shoved me away. He pressed one finger against his lips and tapped it nervously, warning me to stay quiet. Calm down, I whispered. Someone is asking for help. It's a trap, he said. The voice came again. Please. I reached for the door a second time. Jerry tried to pull my hand away, and we silently struggled beside the door. I managed to turn the lock and pull it open. Both of us froze. Our mother was lying on the basement floor. The screaming and banging upstairs continued. The woman in front of us was badly injured. Deep cuts covered her face. Blood had soaked through her clothes, and a large piece of flesh was missing from her leg. The wound looked similar to the bite marks on our father. Jerry and I rushed forward and helped her into the room. She cried out when we lifted her because she could barely put weight on her injured leg. As soon as she crossed the doorway, I closed and locked the door again. Jerry began working on the window. He pulled at the latch and tried to force the old frame upward while I stayed beside our mother. "What happened?" I asked. She struggled to speak at first. Her face was pale, and she was breathing quickly. After taking a moment to gather herself, she told us what had happened. She had woken during the night and seen something leaning over our father. At first, she thought it was one of us. Then she saw its hand. The creature had pushed one long index finger deep into our father's neck. Dad's body was convulsing while blood sprayed from the wound. With every slowing beat of his heart, another weak stream of blood came out. The creature had been watching him die. When it realized our mother was awake, it pulled its finger from his neck and turned toward her. It grabbed her and dragged her from the bed. She screamed and tried to fight, but it was much stronger than she was. It pulled her toward the bedroom door and into the hallway. Before it could drag her all the way downstairs, she managed to kick herself free. The creature attacked her leg. It bit deeply enough to tear away a piece of flesh, then grabbed her again and dragged her down the stairs. She remembered being pulled through the front door and into the bushes in the yard. Then everything went black. She woke sometime later and saw me running from the house. The creature was chasing me down the road. Once it disappeared, she crawled back inside. She was too injured to walk, so she dragged herself into the closet near the front door and hid there. When she heard me return to the house, she thought I might be the creature. She stayed silent and listened. A few minutes later, she heard Jerry and me moving downstairs. She left the closet and slowly crawled to the basement. She had been outside the guest bedroom door, trying to get us to let her in. After she finished telling us, Jerry and I wrapped our arms around her. For a moment, all three of us cried together. Another shrill scream came from upstairs. The creature struck the front door again. Jerry finally managed to open the basement window. The frame made a sharp scraping noise as he lifted it, but the banging upstairs was loud enough to hide the sound. The window was narrow, but it was our only way out. Jerry climbed through first and dropped into the side yard. Then we lifted our mother toward the opening. She cried out as we moved her injured leg, but we had no choice. Jerry pulled from outside while I pushed from inside. Once she was through, I climbed after her. As I reached back to close the window, I heard the front door finally break. The crash shook the house. Something large slid across the hardwood floor upstairs. It sounded like a massive dog losing its balance while running at full speed. Then I heard it move toward the basement stairs. I pulled the window closed and ran. Jerry and I supported our mother between us as we crossed the yard and entered the road. We moved as quickly as possible toward the neighbor's house. Behind us, I heard the creature reach the bottom of the basement stairs. A few seconds later, something struck the guest bedroom door. By then, we were already far enough away that we did not stop. When we reached our neighbor's house, we pounded on the door until they answered. They were shocked by our appearance and quickly brought us inside. We tried to explain what had happened, but none of us could speak clearly. My mother was losing blood, Jerry was crying, and I kept looking through the windows because I expected the creature to appear at any moment. Our neighbors called the police and an ambulance. It was about 5:30 in the morning by then. The sky was slowly beginning to brighten. By the time the police arrived, daylight had spread across the neighborhood. paramedics began treating my mother. They cleaned her wounds, wrapped her leg, and prepared to take her to the hospital. Jerry and I walked with 3 police officers toward our house. I do not think they wanted us to hear their conversation, but we did. 2 of the officers quietly joked about our story. One called it a fairy tale, and another said we had probably watched too many horror movies. I wanted to argue with them, but I knew they would understand once they saw our father. From the outside, the house looked normal. The windows were intact, and nothing unusual could be seen from the road. The moment we entered, however, the terrible smell burned inside our noses. One officer told Jerry and me to wait outside. He stayed near the front entrance while the other 2 moved deeper into the house. About a minute later, gunshots exploded from inside. Then came the scream. It was the same high, unnatural scream that Jerry and I had heard during the night. The 2 officers ran out through the front door with their guns raised. They turned and aimed toward the entrance. The 3rd officer quickly joined them. He moved Jerry and me farther away and stood between us and the house. Less than 10 seconds later, the creature threw itself through an upstairs window. Glass shattered around it as it fell. It landed directly on one of the officers. Even in daylight, it still looked almost exactly like our mother, but its movements were too fast and wild to be human. It clawed at the officer's face and opened its crooked mouth. The other 2 officers began firing. The creature released a piercing squeal and staggered backward. Several bullets struck its chest and stomach. It fell to the ground. All 3 officers continued shooting. Its body jerked with each bullet. They did not stop until their weapons were empty. For several seconds, no one moved. One officer removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His hands were shaking. The officers reloaded and slowly approached the body. They kept their guns aimed at its head until they were certain it was dead. After that, they called for backup, medical support, and a forensic team. Soon, our entire property was surrounded by emergency vehicles. The creature's body was eventually placed inside a sealed container and taken away. No one told us where they were taking it. My mother remained in the hospital for several weeks. The bite in her leg was deep, and she had lost a dangerous amount of blood. She needed surgery and months of physical therapy. Our father was buried a few days later. The police and other officials questioned us many times. They wanted every detail we could remember. They asked what the creature had said, how it had moved, and whether we had seen anything unusual before the attack. I told them about the shape outside the kitchen window and the silence of the cicadas. They wrote everything down, but never explained what they believed the creature was. While our house was being cleaned and repaired, we stayed with one of my mother's close friends. A couple of weeks after Mom left the hospital, a powerful storm moved through the area. Rain struck the windows, and thunder shook the house every few minutes. We stayed up late together and watched another scary movie. None of us truly enjoyed it, but I think we were trying to prove that what had happened would not control our lives. When the movie ended, my mother's friend changed the channel to the local news. She wanted to check whether the storm was becoming dangerous. Instead, a warning filled the screen. The news anchor looked frightened as she read from the message in front of her. The body taken from our house had not been an animal or a human being. Officials were calling it a replicate because of its ability to copy another person's appearance and voice. They had been studying it inside a secure facility. That facility was no longer secure. Sometime during the storm, the replicate had broken free. The authorities warned everyone in the area to remain indoors, lock every entrance, and avoid approaching anyone who behaved strangely, even if that person looked like a family member or friend. My mother, Jerry, and I stared silently at the television. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Then, from somewhere beyond the windows, the cicadas suddenly stopped. Story 2. It happened in September 2019, but even now, 7 years later, I still think about that night from time to time. I do not talk about it often, because there's not much I can prove. Nothing happened after it. No one else saw what I saw, and I never found any sign that somebody had been inside the house. Still, the memory has stayed with me in a way that ordinary dreams and childhood fears never did. The week before it happened, my family had moved into a new house. The move should have been exciting, but everything was made harder because of an accident that happened only a few days earlier. A car had run over my foot. It did not crush it completely, but the injury was bad enough that I could barely put any weight on it. My foot was swollen, badly bruised, and wrapped tightly. The doctor told me to use crutches and keep it raised as much as possible. Moving into a new home while injured was miserable. Everyone else carried boxes, moved furniture, argued over where things should go, and walked back and forth through the rooms. I could not do much except sit, watch, and slowly move from one place to another when I had to. Even that took effort. Every step with the crutches sent a dull pain through my leg, and if I accidentally touched the floor with my injured foot, the pain became sharp enough to make me feel sick. The house itself was not old or damaged. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. It looked normal from the outside, with pale walls, a small front yard, and windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Inside, it smelled of dust, fresh paint, cardboard boxes, and the cleaning products the previous owners had probably used before leaving. The rooms were empty enough that our voices echoed for the first few days. What made the house feel strange was not that it looked frightening. It was simply unfamiliar. Every house has its own sounds. Pipes knock inside the walls. Floorboards shift under changing temperatures. Air moves beneath doors. Refrigerators hum for several minutes and then suddenly become silent. In a place where you have lived for years, you stop noticing those things. You learn what every sound means. In a new house, every small noise feels like it needs an explanation. For the first time in 11 years, I had a bedroom of my own. Before that, I had always shared space with my sister, my parents, or both, depending on where we had been living. Privacy was something I had imagined more than experienced. I had always gone to sleep with another person breathing nearby. If I woke during the night, there was usually someone else in the room. Even when the room was completely dark, I knew I was not alone. So when my parents told me which room would be mine, I was genuinely happy. It was not large, but it felt enormous because it belonged only to me. I could decide where to place my bed. I could leave my things where I wanted them. I did not have to listen to my sister turning over, whispering or complaining that I was taking up too much space. I remember sitting on the mattress while unpacked boxes surrounded me and thinking that the injury was almost worth it just to finally have a room of my own. At the same time, being alone felt strange. The silence in that room was different from the silence I knew. It was wider, somehow. At night, the darkness seemed deeper because there was no second bed, no quiet breathing, and no familiar shape across the room. I did not want to admit that I was nervous. I was 11 years old, and having my own bedroom was supposed to make me feel older. I told myself that any fear I felt was childish and would disappear once I got used to the place. The night it happened was either our second or third night in the house. I have tried many times to remember exactly which one, but I cannot. The days around the move blended together. I remember boxes everywhere, people coming and going, and my parents constantly asking where certain things had been placed. I remember the pain medicine making me tired. I remember sleeping at strange times and waking up confused. That evening, I was more exhausted than usual. My foot had been aching all day. The swelling seemed worse, and even resting it on a pillow did not help much. Every time I shifted my body, the blanket brushed against the injury and caused another wave of pain. By the time I went to bed, I felt completely drained. My room was still only partly unpacked. Some clothes were folded inside open boxes. A few toys and personal things were stacked near the wall. The curtains had not been properly arranged yet, and the room did not feel fully mine. It felt like a temporary place where someone had placed a bed and several boxes. My bed was positioned so that when I lay on my back and looked straight ahead, I could see the open doorway. Beyond the doorway was the hallway. During the day, the hall looked narrow and ordinary. At night, when all the lights were off, it became a long block of darkness. I went to bed early. I do not remember saying goodnight to anyone. I probably did. But my memory begins with me lying down, adjusting the pillow beneath my injured foot, and closing my eyes. I fell asleep almost immediately. Sometime around midnight, pain woke me. It was sudden and sharp, as though someone had pressed directly onto the most badly injured part of my foot. I opened my eyes and sucked in a breath. For a moment, I did not know where I was. The room was dark, and the unfamiliar shapes around me made no sense. Then I remembered the move, the new house, and the boxes. I stayed still and waited for the pain to pass. That was something I had already learned to do. Moving too quickly usually made it worse. I kept my body flat, breathed slowly, and stared into the darkness, while the throbbing became less intense. At first, I was still half asleep. My thoughts were slow and broken. I could hear the faint sound of my own breathing, and perhaps the distant hum of the refrigerator. The house seemed completely quiet. No one was walking around. No television was playing. No doors were opening. Everyone else was asleep. Within a few seconds, I became fully awake. I looked toward the doorway. There was something standing there. The first thing I noticed was its eyes. They were pale, almost completely white, and they were looking directly at me. I could not see pupils or any normal detail. They looked like two small white shapes hanging in the darkness. They were tilted slightly to the right, as if the figure was leaning around the doorframe and peeking into my room. For a second, I tried to make sense of them. I thought that maybe light from outside was reflecting off something. Perhaps there was an object in the hallway that I had not noticed during the day. Maybe the eyes were actually two marks on a box, two screws, or two bright spots on a piece of furniture. Then I noticed how high they were. Whatever was looking at me seemed extremely tall. Its head was close to the top of the doorway. It was taller than my father and taller than anyone else in the house. I could not see its body clearly because everything below the eyes blended into the dark hallway. There was no clear face, no clothing, no arms, and no outline that I could follow. It was simply a darker shape standing inside the darkness. The eyes stayed still. I remember the fear arriving all at once. It was not the quick fear you get after hearing an unexpected noise. It was heavy and cold. My stomach tightened. My chest felt hollow. I wanted to call for my parents, but no sound came out at first. I need to make something clear. I was not unable to move. This was not sleep paralysis. I have thought about that explanation many times because it would make the experience easier to understand. People sometimes wake up, see frightening figures, and feel trapped inside their own bodies. But that was not what happened to me. I could move my head. I could move my hands. I could feel the mattress beneath me and the blanket over my body. I could feel every painful pulse coming from my foot. The problem was the injury. If I tried to jump out of bed or move too quickly, I knew I would cause terrible pain. My crutches were nearby, but they were not close enough for me to grab without sitting up and reaching toward them. Even if I managed to get hold of them, I would still be slow and unsteady. If the figure came toward me, I would not be able to run. I had to decide whether to move, shout, or stay still. I chose to stay still. Part of me hoped that if I watched closely, the shape would become something normal. Maybe my eyes would adjust and I would see a coat hanging in the hallway. Maybe one of my parents had come to check on me and was standing in the doorway. Perhaps my father had heard me moving in bed and wanted to make sure my foot was all right. But the longer I looked, the less normal it seemed. No one in my family was that tall. No one had white eyes. The figure did not breathe loudly or shift its weight. It did not make any of the small sounds a person makes when standing still. There was no clothing moving, no foot scraping against the floor, and no hand touching the doorframe. It was completely silent. I stared at it, and it stared back. I do not know how long that lasted. It may have been only 5 or 10 seconds. Fear can change the way time feels. A few seconds can stretch into something much longer. In my memory, it feels as though we watched each other for several minutes. I remember trying not to blink. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, even for a moment, it would move closer. At the same time, my eyes began to water from staring. I wanted to pull the blanket over my head, but that idea frightened me even more. If I covered my face, I would not know where the figure was, so I stayed where I was. The figure remained in the doorway with its head slightly tilted. I began thinking about who or what it could be. An intruder seemed possible, but I could not understand why a burglar would stand silently and watch a child instead of searching the house or running away. I wondered if it was a neighbor who had entered by mistake. I wondered if one of the doors had been left unlocked while everyone was moving boxes inside. But an ordinary person would have reacted after being seen. They would have stepped back, spoken, or moved into the room. They would not have remained completely still with their eyes fixed on me. This thing did nothing. I felt certain that it knew I was awake. The eyes were locked onto mine. They did not move toward the boxes, the window, or anything else in the room. They did not even glance down at my injured foot. They only watched my face. The silence became unbearable. I considered shouting for my father. My mouth opened slightly, but I was afraid that making a sound would cause the figure to rush toward me. That fear may not have made sense, but in that moment, it felt certain. As long as neither of us moved, I felt that there was some kind of balance between us. I believed that if I broke that balance, something terrible would happen. I tried to listen for breathing. There was none. I tried to see whether its chest was moving. I could not even tell where its chest was supposed to be. The darkness surrounding the figure seemed too thick. I could see enough of the doorway to know that something was occupying the space, but I could not separate its body from the shadows around it. The white eyes were the only clear part. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was looking at an animal standing on something. Maybe a cat had climbed onto a stack of boxes. But no animal could have reached that height, and the eyes did not shine like the eyes of a cat or dog. Animal eyes usually reflect light, turning yellow, green, or red depending on the angle. These eyes looked white, not glowing exactly, but visible in a way that everything else was not. I slowly moved one of my hands beneath the blanket. The movement was small, but I was certain the figure noticed. Its head did not move. Its eyes did not blink. I stopped moving. The pain in my foot had become less important. It was still there, throbbing with every beat of my heart, but fear had pushed it into the background. My entire body felt tense. I could feel sweat forming along my forehead, even though the room was cool. I thought about my sister and parents sleeping somewhere nearby. They were not far away, but they might as well have been on the other side of the world. To reach them, I would have to pass through the doorway. I would have to pass directly beside whatever was standing there. That was impossible. Then, for reasons I still do not fully understand, I turned my head away. Maybe my eyes needed a break. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that the figure was not real. Maybe part of me believed that when I looked back, the doorway would be empty and I would feel foolish. Perhaps I expected it to remain where it was. I looked toward the wall beside my bed for only a moment. It could not have been more than a second or two. Then I looked back. The figure was gone. The doorway was empty. The hallway beyond it was still dark, but there were no white eyes and no tall shape. I stared at the place where it had been, waiting for it to return. Nothing happened. I listened for footsteps. If someone had walked away, I should have heard the floor creak or the soft sound of feet moving down the hallway. If a door had opened, I should have heard the handle turning or the hinges moving. If someone had run, the sound would have been obvious. There was nothing. The house remained completely silent. I wanted to believe that I had imagined it, but my body did not calm down. My heart was pounding, and my hands had started shaking. I looked around the room, expecting the figure to be standing somewhere else. I checked the corners. I checked the window. I checked the dark space beside the stacked boxes. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every object seemed to have changed shape. A pile of clothes looked like someone crouching. The edge of a box looked like a shoulder. The curtains moved slightly, and for a second, I thought something was hiding behind them. I thought about calling for my parents, but I was ashamed. I had been so proud of having my own room, I did not want them to think I was scared of the dark on my second or third night alone. I also worried that if I shouted and they came into the room, they would find nothing and tell me it had been a dream. So I remained quiet. I do not remember how long I stayed awake. I kept watching the doorway, certain that the eyes would appear again. Every small sound in the house made me tense. The air conditioner came on, and I nearly screamed. Somewhere inside the walls, a pipe made a soft knocking sound. The refrigerator stopped humming, and the sudden silence felt worse than the noise. Something shifted in another room, perhaps one of my parents turning over in bed, and I held my breath until the house became still again. I could not stop thinking about how quickly the figure had disappeared. There had been no movement. One moment, it was standing in the doorway. The next moment, it was gone. I wondered whether it had stepped into my room while I was looking away. That thought was worse than anything else. I stared beside the bed, terrified that I might see those white eyes only a few inches from my face. I saw nothing. Still, I could not bring myself to look beneath the bed. At some point, I must have fallen asleep again. I do not remember deciding to sleep or feeling safe enough to close my eyes. Exhaustion must have taken over while I was still watching the doorway. In the morning, sunlight entered the room and made everything look harmless. The boxes were only boxes. The curtains were thin and ordinary. The doorway was just a doorway. The hallway was narrow, bright, and completely empty. For several seconds, I wondered if the entire experience had been a dream. Then the memory returned clearly. I remembered the pain waking me. I remembered staring into the hallway. I remembered the tilted white eyes and the dark shape reaching almost to the top of the doorway. Using my crutches, I slowly moved toward the place where the figure had been standing. I examined the doorframe, the walls, and the ceiling. I looked at everything from the same angle I had seen from my bed. There was nothing there that could have created the shape. I checked the hallway for reflective objects. There were no decorations on the walls yet. No mirror, no picture frame, no lamp with a shiny surface. There were still some boxes nearby, but none of them reached anywhere close to the top of the doorway, and none had white markings that looked like eyes. I returned to the bed and looked again. Nothing matched what I had seen. I did not find footprints, scratches, or any sign that someone had entered the house. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. My family said they had slept through the entire night. I cannot remember whether I told them immediately. I think I mentioned seeing something, but I probably did not explain how frightened I had been. Children sometimes understand that adults will dismiss a story before they even tell it. I may have said that I saw a shadow, and someone may have told me it was because the house was new and I was tired. That explanation was reasonable. I had been exhausted. I had woken suddenly because of severe pain. The room was dark, and my brain was still adjusting after sleep. Human minds are good at finding faces in random shapes. Two pale spots can become eyes. A shadow can become a body. In a new house where nothing is familiar, the imagination has plenty of room to create things. I have tried to accept that answer. Maybe the white eyes were caused by light coming through a window. Maybe a passing car created two reflections that disappeared when it continued down the street. Maybe my eyes were not fully focused. Maybe I was still partly dreaming even though I felt awake. It is also possible to see dreamlike images for a short time after waking. It does not always mean that a person is unable to move. Perhaps that is what happened. My brain may have taken the darkness of the doorway and filled it with something frightening. All of those explanations are possible. But there are details that continue to bother me. The eyes did not move like reflected light. They stayed in exactly the same place. They appeared to be looking directly at me. The slight tilt of the head seemed deliberate, like the figure was curious or trying to remain partly hidden. Most of all, I remember the feeling that there was awareness behind those eyes. That may only be part of the memory now. 7 years is a long time. Memories change. Fear can add details and sharpen certain parts while removing others. I know that. I understand that the mind is not a perfect camera. Still, when I think about that night, I remember one thing more clearly than anything else. I did not feel as though I was looking at a shadow. I felt as though something was looking back at me. Nothing similar ever happened again. I never saw the figure on another night. I never found white eyes watching from a doorway or window. The house eventually stopped feeling new. Its sounds became familiar. I learned which floorboards creaked, how the pipes sounded, and when the refrigerator turned on. My bedroom became comfortable, and sleeping alone became normal. For years, I almost convinced myself that the experience had been nothing more than a tired brain creating a frightening image. Then, occasionally, I would wake in the middle of the night and find myself looking toward a doorway. For one brief second, before my eyes adjusted, I would expect to see those two pale eyes again. I never did. Perhaps that should make me feel better. If there had truly been something inside the house, maybe it would have returned. Maybe other strange things would have happened. Maybe someone else would have seen it. But sometimes I wonder whether it was connected to the house at all. Maybe it was only passing through. Maybe it noticed that I was awake. Maybe it left because I saw it. There is another possibility that bothers me even more. Perhaps the figure had been standing there on the first night too. Maybe it had watched me while I slept, and I simply had not woken up. Perhaps the pain in my foot was the only reason I opened my eyes that night. Without the injury, I might never have known it was there. I sometimes wonder how long it had been standing in the doorway before I woke. A few seconds? Several minutes? Had it entered the hallway after everyone went to sleep? Or had it been waiting there since the lights went out? I will never know. The image of it remains simple in my mind. A dark doorway, a shape too tall to be anyone in my family. Two pale eyes leaning slightly around the frame. It never spoke. It never moved while I watched it. It did not need to. The fact that it was there was enough. I do not know what stood in my doorway on the second or third night in that house. I do not know whether it was a trick of light, a waking dream, or something that has no simple explanation. I only know that I was awake. I could move, and I watched it until I looked away. When I looked back, it was gone. Even now, I still think about what might have happened if I had not turned my head. Sometimes I think that looking away saved me. Other times, I wonder if that brief moment was exactly what it had been waiting for. Story 3. When I was young, my father and I used to go hunting together whenever we had the chance. It was our tradition, something that belonged only to the two of us. Some fathers took their sons to baseball games or taught them how to fix cars. My father took me deep into the woods before sunrise, when the world was still dark and cold, and every sound seemed louder than it should have been. I wanted to enjoy it because I knew how much it meant to him, but I always hated walking through the woods. Even as a child, I felt as though something was watching us from behind the trees. I could never explain what I thought it was. I did not imagine a bear, a wolf, or some escaped criminal hiding in the darkness. Those were real things, and real things could be understood. The feeling I had was different. It felt like there was something in the forest that I did not know about, something my father knew but had never told me. The woods always seemed too quiet when we entered them. Our boots would crush leaves and small branches, making enough noise to announce our presence to every animal for miles. My father moved confidently, carrying his bow across his shoulder while I stayed close behind him. He knew every trail, every stream, and almost every tree. Even in the darkness, he seemed to know exactly where he was going. I was the opposite. I would look between the trees and imagine shapes moving just outside the beam of my flashlight. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind us, but when I stopped, the sound stopped too. My father always said it was only an echo or the sound of falling acorns. He always had an explanation. That was what made me feel safe around him. No matter what frightened me, he could explain it. An owl screaming in the darkness was just an owl. Scratches on a tree were from a bear. A strange smell in the air came from a dead animal or rotting plants. There was no mystery that my father could not solve. One morning, when I was about 12 years old, I finally asked him if there was anything dangerous in those woods that I did not know about. He stopped walking and turned around. The beam of his flashlight lit the side of his face, leaving the other half in darkness. "Oh, please," he said with a quiet laugh. "If there really was something out there, I would tell you." Then he patted me on the back and continued walking toward our tree stand. I believed him. At least, I tried to. We climbed into the stand and sat there for hours. The cold morning slowly became warm as sunlight moved between the branches. My legs went numb from sitting still, and every few minutes my father reminded me not to move. If we were lucky, a lonely deer would eventually wander past us. I remember the first good buck I ever shot. It came through the trees slowly, lifting its head every few steps to listen. Its antlers looked like shattered glass, wide and sharp, catching the weak sunlight above the forest floor. My father touched my shoulder and pointed. I raised the bow. My arms were thin back then, and I had to use every bit of strength I had to pull back the string. My hands shook. My breathing sounded too loud inside my head. The buck turned slightly, giving me a clear shot. I released the arrow. The buck jumped and ran. For one terrible second, I thought I had missed. Then my father smiled and pointed to the blood on the leaves. "You got him," he whispered. "That was a good shot." He was proud of me, more proud than usual. I remember how warm that made me feel. My father was not an emotional man. He did not often say he was proud, and he was not the type to hug or offer long speeches. His approval came through small things: a smile, a hand on the shoulder, or a simple nod. That day, he gave me all three. We climbed down and followed the blood trail. At first, it was easy to see. Bright drops marked the leaves every few feet. Sometimes there was blood on the side of a tree or across a broken branch. My father explained that the buck would not get far. But it did. We followed the trail for what felt like miles. The blood became lighter, but it never disappeared completely. Every time I thought we had lost it, my father found another drop. We crossed a narrow stream, climbed over fallen trees, and moved deeper into a part of the woods I had never seen before. The sunlight barely reached the ground there. The trees grew close together, and many of them were old and twisted. Their roots pushed through the soil like thick fingers. Some of the trunks were so wide that two people could not have wrapped their arms around them. I began to feel watched again. My father must have noticed because he told me not to worry. He said the buck was injured and probably lying nearby. Then, the trail stopped. Not slowly, not with the blood drops becoming smaller or farther apart. It simply stopped. There was blood on one side of a large tree, but nothing on the other side. There were no hoof prints in the mud, no broken branches, no disturbed leaves. It was as if the animal had walked into the tree and vanished. My father searched around the area for nearly an hour. He circled the tree, checked the roots, and examined every nearby trail. He even climbed partway up the trunk, looking for blood on the bark. He found nothing. For the first time in my life, my father did not have an explanation. I remember asking him where the deer had gone. He did not answer right away. He looked at the tree for a long time. It was enormous, with dark bark and thick branches stretching out over the forest. There was something strange about it, though I could not understand what. The other trees moved in the wind, but that one remained still. Finally, my father said the buck must have turned somewhere and that we had missed the trail. But I could hear uncertainty in his voice. We never found the deer. On the way home, my father barely spoke. He usually talked about the hunt, pointing out mistakes and telling me what I had done right. That day, he stared through the windshield with both hands tight around the steering wheel. I never asked about the deer again. As the years passed, I continued hunting with my father. The fear I felt in the woods slowly faded. I grew taller and stronger. I learned how to read tracks, move quietly, and understand the sounds around me. The forest became familiar. I stopped imagining things behind every tree. I stopped looking over my shoulder whenever I heard a branch snap. Eventually, the woods became peaceful to me. My father had been right, I told myself. There was nothing out there. Life moved on. I got married, found a job, and became a father myself. Hunting trips became less frequent. Work took more of my time, and my father became older. Age was not kind to him. His knees started to hurt. His hands became stiff. He could no longer walk for miles without resting. The strong man who had once moved through the forest like he belonged there began to struggle with simple tasks. I hated seeing him that way. For several years, we talked about going hunting again, but something always got in the way. I had work. He had a doctor's appointment. The weather was bad. The season ended. Then, one fall, we finally found a date that worked. My father sounded excited when I called him. One more trip, he said. Just like old times. We decided to go to the same woods we had hunted in when I was a child. I had not been there in years. The area had changed. Some trails were overgrown, while others had been cleared by younger hunters. There were new signs, fences, and tracks from all-terrain vehicles. But the deeper we walked, the more familiar everything became. I remembered certain rocks, streams, and hills. I remembered following my father through the darkness as a frightened boy. Now, I was the one helping him over fallen branches and waiting whenever he needed to catch his breath. We planned to hunt near the place where my first buck had disappeared. My father had mentioned that another hunter had built a tree stand nearby. When we reached the location, I realized it was not merely nearby. The new stand was attached to the same tree. I recognized it immediately. The trunk was wider than I remembered, and many of the lower branches were gone. But it was the same tree. Its bark was dark and deeply cracked, and its thick roots still rose from the ground like fingers. Seeing it made my childhood fear return so quickly that I almost felt sick. My father noticed my expression. "You remember this place?" he asked. I nodded. "The deer," I said. He looked at the tree for a moment before forcing a smile. That was a long time ago. We had brought 2 hunting positions with us. My father climbed into the tree stand while I set up a ground blind about 30 yards away. He wanted to be in the stand because it gave him a better view, and he insisted that his knees could handle the climb. I almost argued with him. Something about that tree made me want to leave. but I felt foolish. I was an adult, nearly 50 years old at the time. I had spent most of my life telling myself that the memory of the missing deer had a reasonable explanation. So I helped my father into the stand. We sat there for hours. Every now and then we whispered to each other. We talked about my children, his health, and the old hunts we had shared. He made a joke about how scared I used to be in the woods. I laughed, but the sound felt wrong. The day became warmer, and a mild breeze moved through the forest. The leaves rattled above us. Branches swayed and rubbed against one another. Every tree moved except the one holding my father. Its leaves remained still. Its branches did not sway. The strange tree stood completely motionless, as if it were holding its breath. I noticed it several times, but I told myself it was only because the tree was old or dying. Maybe its branches were too heavy. Maybe the surrounding trees blocked the wind. Still, I could not stop looking at it. The more I watched, the less it looked like a tree. It looked like a hunter standing perfectly still in front of its prey. By dusk, we had not seen a single deer. The woods slowly became dark. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the air grew colder. I had not slept well the night before, and the quiet made it difficult to stay awake. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be only a moment. I do not know how long I slept. I was awakened by a sound I still cannot fully explain. It began with a crack, like thick bark splitting apart. Underneath it was a deep scream that sounded almost like an elk call, except rougher and more painful. I sat up so fast that I hit my head against the top of the blind. For several seconds, I did not know where I was. Then I looked through the small window. The tree was moving, not swaying. Moving, the trunk bent inward and opened like the jaw of some enormous animal. A dark gap appeared beneath the tree stand. Before I could shout, the stand tilted. My father woke just as the tree pulled him inside. His eyes opened, and for one terrible moment, he looked directly at me. Confusion appeared on his face first, then understanding. The tree swallowed him. The entire stand, with my father still strapped inside, disappeared into the opening. Thick branches folded over the gap like ribs closing around a heart. I heard my father scream. I threw open the blind and stumbled outside. The opening in the tree began to shrink. It did not close quickly. It closed slowly, almost carefully. Metal scraped against wood. The stand bent and twisted as the trunk tightened around it. I could hear wires snapping. I could hear steel groaning. Then I heard bones. My father shouted my name, Aiden. I took a step toward the tree. Every part of me wanted to run to him, but I did not know what I could do. The trunk had already closed around most of the stand. Only part of the metal frame remained visible. Dad, he screamed again. Go to the car, Aiden. Get your foe. His words ended with a horrible crunch. It was the sound of metal, wire, bone, and flesh being crushed together. The tree closed completely. For a moment, everything became silent. There was no hole in the trunk, no blood on the bark, no sign that a man in a tree stand had ever been there. I stood frozen, staring at it. Then something moved beneath the bark. A long shape pushed outward from inside the trunk, as though someone were pressing a hand against thin cloth. That broke whatever control I had left. I ran. I left the blind, the weapons, and all our gear behind. I ran through the woods without following a trail. Branches struck my face and arms. Roots caught my boots and nearly pulled me to the ground. Behind me, I heard the tree scream. The sound changed as it followed me. First, it sounded like an elk call. Then it became the cry of a wounded deer. Then it became my father's voice. Aiden. I kept running. Aiden, come back. The voice sounded exactly like him. Not almost like him. Exactly. It had the same fear and pain I had heard before the tree crushed him. I reached the parking area and saw my old station wagon. Rust covered the doors and one headlight was cracked, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pulled the keys from my pocket, but my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them. The voice came again from the woods. Aiden, help me. I stopped. For one terrible moment, I believed it was really him. I imagined that he had somehow escaped. I imagined him crawling toward me, injured and alone. Then the voice changed. It became deeper. Aiden, the trees at the edge of the parking area began to move. There was no wind. I grabbed the keys, opened the car door, and climbed inside. The old leather seat folded under my weight. I started the engine and pressed the gas before the door was fully closed. As I drove away, I heard my father calling from the woods. He used the same tone he had used when he told me to run. I did not look back. The police searched the area after I reported him missing. I told them he had fallen from the tree stand and that I had become confused while trying to find help. I could not tell them the truth. They found our blind, our equipment, and tracks leading to the tree. They did not find the stand. They did not find blood. They did not find my father. One officer suggested he had become injured and wandered away. Another believed he had suffered some medical emergency. Search teams looked for weeks. They found nothing. I am 59 years old now. My wife does not know what happened that night. My children do not know either. They believe their grandfather disappeared during a hunting trip. I moved my family into the city soon afterward. I bought a house surrounded by concrete traffic and streetlights. There are no large trees near it. I made sure of that before signing the papers. People complain about the noise of the city, but I find it comforting. Engines, sirens, and voices remind me that I am not alone. I have not entered a forest since that night. Sometimes I still dream about the tree. In those dreams, the trunk opens, and my father is sitting inside it. His body is twisted around pieces of the tree stand. Branches grow through his arms and chest. He looks at me and says the same words he told me when I was a child. If there really was something out there, I would tell you. Then the tree closes. I often wonder about the deer I shot all those years ago. I wonder whether the tree took it the same way it took my father. Maybe the deer did not vanish. Maybe it was eaten. Sometimes I think about all the missing hunters and hikers whose bodies are never found. People blame wild animals, accidents, or bad weather, but I know there are worse things in the woods. Things that have learned how to stay still. Things that can imitate the voices of the dead. And after all these years, I still wonder whether that thing is hunting, or whether it has simply been waiting for me to return. Story 4. The last pieces of wood in the campfire cracked and hissed as the flames slowly died. Small sparks floated into the dark sky before disappearing between the branches of the tall pine trees surrounding Camp Echo Wood. The weak orange light moved across the clearing, making every tree look twisted and alive. It was the final night of summer camp. By morning, buses would arrive to take everyone home. The cabins would be empty again. The dining hall would go silent. and the narrow dirt paths would be covered with fallen pine needles until the next group of campers arrived. For most of the kids, the last night was supposed to be fun. It was a chance to stay up late, eat too many roasted marshmallows, and tell scary stories around the fire. But 14-year-old Avery did not look like he was having fun. He sat at the far end of one of the log benches, almost completely hidden beneath the hood of his dark gray sweatshirt. The firelight touched only part of his face. One side looked pale and empty, while the other remained buried in shadow. The air smelled of smoke, pine needles, damp soil, and the lake nearby. To Avery, however, it smelled different. It smelled like wet rot. It smelled like old blood. It smelled like the copper taste that sometimes filled his mouth when he remembered what had happened the previous summer. 5 campers remained around the fire. Their counselor, Mr. Nolan, had already left for the staff cabin almost 20 minutes earlier. He had told them not to stay out too late and not to go anywhere near the lake. Nobody had taken his warning seriously. The final night always followed the same tradition. Once the counselors left, the older campers gathered around the fire and took turns telling frightening stories. They called it the final scare. The goal was simple. Whoever told the best story won. There was no real prize, but the winner earned the right to talk about it for the rest of the night. More importantly, nobody wanted to be the person whose story made everyone laugh for the wrong reason. Chloe had just finished telling a story about a girl who saw a ghost standing behind her whenever she looked into a mirror. She had added strange voices, bloody handprints, and a final twist about the ghost living inside the girl's reflection. Nobody had been very frightened. Marcus, a tall boy with messy brown hair, had spent most of the story making faces at Sarah whenever Chloe tried to whisper dramatically. When Chloe finished, Marcus gave her a slow, joking clap. "Terrifying," he said. "I may never look in a mirror again." Chloe rolled her eyes and threw a pine cone at him. "At least I told a story," she said. "All you did was talk about a guy with a hook for a hand. It was a classic. It was boring." The other campers laughed. Marcus turned toward Avery. "Your turn," he said. Avery did not answer. He continued staring into the glowing coals. His hands were pushed deep into the pockets of his sweatshirt. He had barely spoken all evening. Marcus leaned closer and nudged him with one elbow. "Come on, Avery. You said you had something good." Avery slowly lifted his eyes. Marcus smiled. "Make it better than Chloe's," he said. "Ghosts and mirrors are kid stuff." "Shut up," Chloe said. Avery did not smile. The others waited. The campfire popped loudly, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Avery looked at each camper sitting around the fire. There was Marcus, who always tried to act brave. Chloe sat across from him, wearing a red camp jacket and holding a stick with a burned marshmallow at the end. Sarah was wrapped in a thick blue blanket, even though the night was warm. Beside her sat Ben and Tyler, 2 brothers who had spent almost the entire summer arguing with each other. Avery's gaze finally moved toward the dark path leading down to the lake. The water could not be seen from the clearing, but it was close enough to hear. Small waves touched the rocky shore with a gentle, repeating sound. Avery looked back at the fire. "You all know why I'm here alone this year, right?" he asked. His voice was quiet and rough. Nobody answered. The playful mood around the fire disappeared almost immediately. Marcus stopped smiling. Sarah looked down at the ground. They all knew Avery had come to Camp Echo Wood the previous summer with his twin sister, Missy, They also knew Missy had never gone home. The official story was that she had died during a hiking accident on the final night of camp. The counselors said she had left her cabin after dark and somehow reached one of the dangerous trails near the northern cliffs. Search teams found blood on a group of rocks below the trail, along with one of her shoes. Her body was never recovered. Most people believed she had fallen into the river below the cliffs and had been carried away by the strong current. Nobody at camp spoke about it openly. Even the counselors avoided saying her name. Avery had returned to camp alone this year, which surprised everyone. Some people thought his parents had forced him to come so he could face his grief. Others believed he had chosen to return because he wanted to feel close to his sister. Avery had never explained his reason. Until now. "You mean Missy?" Sarah asked carefully. Avery nodded. "Everyone says she fell from a cliff," he said. Sarah shifted beneath her blanket. "That's what happened, wasn't it?" No, the single word made the clearing feel colder. Marcus glanced toward the dark trees. "What do you mean, no?" Avery leaned forward slightly. "It wasn't a cliff," he said. "It was the lake." The other campers stared at him. Avery's face remained calm. "Last August, on the night before checkout, Missy and I left our cabin after everyone went to sleep. We wanted to go swimming. We knew we weren't allowed near the water at night, but we didn't care. We had done it before." Marcus gave a nervous laugh. "You went swimming in that lake?" Avery ignored him. "We followed the path behind Cabin 7, he continued. "There was no moon that night, so we used a small flashlight. The path looked different in the dark. The trees seemed closer together, and every sound felt louder. As he spoke, even the harmless noises of the forest seemed to change. The insects buzzing near the fire became quieter. The wind stopped moving through the branches. Only Avery's voice and the distant movement of the lake remained. When we reached the shore, we noticed something strange," Avery said. "The water was completely still. There were no frogs, no insects, and no fish jumping near the surface. It felt like everything around the lake was hiding." Ben rubbed his arms. "Then we heard something near the old pump house." The old pump house stood on the western side of the lake. It had once been used to move water to the camp's showers and kitchens, but the building had been abandoned years earlier. The windows were broken, the roof was partly collapsed, and thick weeds covered the walls. Campers were not supposed to go near it. According to one rumor, the floor inside had rotted away. According to another, something lived underneath it. "What did you hear?" Chloe asked. Avery turned toward her. "It sounded like something heavy dragging itself across the shore," he said. "Not footsteps. Not an animal walking. It was slower than that." He paused. "It sounded like wet leather being pulled over gravel." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Avery continued. "At first, Missy thought it was a deer. I knew it wasn't. Deer don't crawl out of lakes." Marcus shifted on the bench. "You saw it come out of the water?" "Not at first." Avery looked toward the path again. "We saw the water moving. Something large was swimming beneath the surface. It came closer to the shore, but it stayed deep enough that we couldn't see what it was. Then, the smell reached us." Avery took a slow breath through his nose. Dead fish, mud, rotting meat. Tyler glanced over his shoulder. Avery saw him do it and smiled slightly. "We should have run," Avery said, "but we didn't. Missy wanted to see what it was. She always had to know everything. She picked up a rock and threw it into the water. The campers waited. The rock hit something." Ben frowned. How could you tell? Because it screamed. Avery's voice lowered. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like someone trying to scream while their mouth was filled with water. A log inside the fire broke apart with a sharp crack. Chloe jumped. Marcus laughed at her. But the sound was weak. Avery leaned closer to the fire. Then it came onto the shore. His eyes reflected the orange glow. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I had ever seen. Its skin was pale and almost clear, like the skin of something that had lived its entire life in a cave. I could see black veins moving under it. Its body was swollen and covered in thick mud. Sarah shook her head. No, it crawled on 4 twisted legs, Avery continued. The front legs were longer than the back ones, and each foot ended in hooked claws. Its head was flat and wide. It had no eyes, only soft holes where its eyes should have been. Marcus swallowed. What about its mouth? Avery looked at him. It opened sideways. Nobody laughed. Avery spoke slowly, allowing each detail to settle into their minds. It had rows of thin teeth that pointed backward. Once something entered that mouth, it could never pull itself out. He moved one hand out of his pocket and drew a long shape in the air. But the worst part was the tail. The firelight moved across his fingers. It had a long, thick tail covered with sharp fins. Each fin had tiny edges like the teeth of a saw. One scratch was enough to kill you. Marcus tried to smile. Let me guess. Poison? Toxin, Avery corrected him. It enters your blood and reaches your heart. Your organs begin shutting down one after another. First, your muscles stop working. Then, your lungs fill with fluid. After that, your heart slows until it stops. Sarah stared at him. How long does it take? 10 minutes. For several seconds, no one said anything. Avery returned his hand to his pocket. The creature crawled between us and the path back to camp. We ran toward the pump house because it was the only place we could go. It followed us across the shore. He made a wet dragging sound with his tongue. Sarah looked disturbed. Stop doing that. Avery ignored her. We reached the pump house, but the door was locked. The creature was getting closer. Missy pulled on the handle while I tried to break one of the windows with a stone. His voice began to tremble. At first, it sounded like fear. Then, it sounded like grief. It was right behind us. We could hear it breathing. Every breath was wet and heavy, as though its lungs were filled with lake water. Avery looked down. Missy saw it coming toward me. His shoulders shook. She stepped between us. Sarah's expression softened. Avery continued in a broken whisper. She pushed me away and told me to run. The creature swung its tail. One of the fins caught her across the throat. Chloe covered her mouth. There was blood everywhere, Avery said. Missy fell beside the pump house. She tried to call my name, but she couldn't speak properly. The toxin was already inside her. He closed his eyes. The creature climbed on top of her. Marcus looked sick now. I ran, Avery said. I heard her screaming behind me. I heard that thing tearing into her body. She sacrificed herself so I could live. The woods around them seemed completely silent. Avery opened his eyes. It's still in the lake, he said. It hides beneath the deepest part of the mud during the day. At night, it comes closer to shore. Sarah looked toward the path. Waiting for what? A bigger meal. For one long moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus laughed. The sound was sudden and far too loud. Everyone looked at him. Marcus shook his head and leaned back on the bench. Okay, he said. That was actually good. Avery watched him. The lake mutant? Marcus continued. Seriously? You almost had me. Sarah blinked. What? Marcus pointed toward Avery. The counselors tell a version of that story every year. They say something with a poisonous tail lives in the lake, so nobody goes skinny dipping after dark. Ben slowly relaxed. I've heard that story too. Exactly, Marcus said. It's just an urban legend. Chloe let out a nervous breath. The 10-minute poison is a little dramatic. Toxin, Tyler corrected, and the boys laughed. The tension around the fire began to fade. Sarah smiled, although she still kept glancing toward the dark trees. You almost had us for a second, Avery, she said. The part about your sister was messed up, though. Very messed up, Chloe added. Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. I'll admit it was better than the mirror ghost. Chloe threw another pine cone at him. The campers laughed again. Avery did not. He remained perfectly still, staring at Marcus. Slowly, the corners of his mouth began to rise. At first, it looked like an ordinary smile. Then it widened. It stretched farther than it should have, forming a sharp and unnatural grin across his pale face. The laughter stopped. Avery tilted his head. You're right, he said. His voice sounded different. It was deeper than before. The story about my sister sacrificing herself is only a legend. Marcus lowered the stick. What? I made that part up. Sarah stared at him. The fire cracked softly. Avery leaned closer until his face was directly above the flames. The heat should have forced him back, but he did not even blink. The truth is, he whispered, Missy didn't sacrifice herself. Nobody moved. She fought, Avery said. She fought harder than I had ever seen anyone fight. She hit the creature with stones. She kicked it. She screamed for me to help her. His smile remained. But I'm a survivor. Marcus's face became pale. Avery, stop. Avery continued as though he had not heard him. We both tried to run. Missy was faster than me. I knew the creature would catch whoever was behind. Sarah slowly stood. What did you do? Avery turned toward her. I tripped her. Sarah froze. I grabbed the back of her shirt and pulled her down. When she fell, I pushed her toward the creature. Chloe made a small sound of disgust. You're lying. Missy caught one of the fins across her shoulder. The toxin entered her blood. Her legs stopped working before she could stand. Avery looked into the coals. She reached for me. She kept saying my name. She begged me not to leave her. Marcus stood quickly. That isn't funny. Avery's grin widened. I wasn't laughing then. Marcus pointed toward the camp cabins. We're leaving. Avery looked at him. You should have left before the fire got low. The campers looked at one another. Nobody laughed now. Avery turned back toward the trees. The creatures started eating Missy while she was still alive, but before I ran, I spoke to it. Ben's voice shook. You spoke to that thing? It understood me. Avery reached into his sweatshirt pocket and removed a small silver necklace. A broken letter M hung from the chain. Sarah recognized it immediately. Missy had worn that necklace in almost every picture displayed at the camp memorial the previous year. Avery wrapped the chain around his fingers. I told it that one girl wouldn't be enough, he said. I told it that her body would not last until the next summer. The lake water moved in the darkness. The sound was louder now. Avery continued. I promised that if it let me go, I would return. Marcus backed away from him. I told it I would bring more people. I told it I would bring young people who were strong and healthy. Chloe stood beside Sarah. Avery looked around the circle. I told it I would bring a feast. A heavy sound came from behind the benches. Slap, everyone turned. Nothing could be seen between the trees. Another sound followed. Slap. It sounded like something wet hitting the ground. Then came the breathing. It was slow, deep, and uneven. Each breath ended with a thick bubbling sound, as though water filled the creature's lungs. Sarah dropped her blanket. Marcus stepped away from the fire. What is that? Avery smiled at him. Why do you think I insisted on staying at this campsite? He asked. There were 3 other clearings we could have used. The wet breathing moved from one side of the clearing to the other. Why do you think I volunteered to lead the final scare? Slap, closer now. Why do you think I waited until Mr. Nolan returned to the staff cabin? Chloe began crying. Avery slowly stood. Because this clearing is the closest one to the water. Marcus turned toward the path leading back to camp. Run. He had only taken 2 steps when something moved beneath the leaves. A dark shape wrapped around his ankle. Marcus fell forward, striking the ground hard. He screamed and kicked, but the shape pulled him backward. Sarah grabbed his hands. Help me, Marcus shouted. Ben and Tyler rushed forward, but Avery remained beside the fire. The thing around Marcus's ankle tightened. In the firelight, they saw that it was not a root or a rope. It was a pale tail. Sharp fins rose along its surface. One of them sliced through Marcus's sock and cut into his skin. Marcus screamed. His body immediately began to shake. Sarah released his hands and stumbled backward. The tail pulled Marcus into the darkness. His screams continued for several seconds. Then they changed into choking sounds. The bushes beside the clearing exploded outward. A massive pale creature crawled into the firelight. Its body was larger than a bear. Translucent skin stretched across its swollen frame, revealing thick black veins underneath. Mud and weeds hung from its back. Its long front legs bent in the wrong direction, and hooked claws dug into the soil. Its head lifted. Where its eyes should have been, there were only 2 dark holes. Its mouth opened sideways. Rows of thin teeth unfolded from inside. Marcus lay beneath one of its claws. Blood poured from the wound on his leg. He tried to crawl away, but his arms had already begun to fail. The toxin was spreading. The creature lowered its mouth toward him. Marcus screamed Avery's name. Avery watched without moving. The creature bit into Marcus's shoulder. The sound of tearing flesh filled the clearing. Chloe turned and ran toward the cabins. She made it only a few feet before the creature's tail swept across the ground. One of the fins struck the back of her legs. She fell, screaming. Tyler grabbed Ben's arm and pulled him toward the opposite side of the clearing. But the shadows between the trees seemed to move around them. The creature had not come alone. Smaller shapes crawled through the brush near the lake. Pale limbs moved over rocks. Wet mouths opened in the dark. Avery had promised a feast. The creature had brought its young. Sarah backed toward the fire, shaking her head. Avery, she whispered. Please. He looked at her. We didn't do anything to you. No, Avery said calmly. You didn't. Then help us. Avery looked toward the creature as it tore another piece from Marcus's body. I already made my choice last summer. Sarah picked up a burning branch from the fire and held it in front of her. The creature turned toward her, its empty eye holes fixed on the flame. For 1 second, it hesitated. Sarah swung the branch at its face. The burning wood struck its pale skin, filling the clearing with the smell of cooked meat and swamp water. The creature released a horrible, bubbling scream. Sarah ran. She reached the path. For a moment, Avery thought she might escape. Then the smaller creatures came from the trees. Sarah's scream echoed through the forest. It ended suddenly. Ben and Tyler were dragged in different directions. Their voices called for each other until both disappeared beneath the wet sounds of feeding. Chloe tried to crawl away, but the toxin had already paralyzed her legs. She looked back at Avery as the creature moved toward her. "You're a monster," she whispered. Avery watched the creature's bladed tail rise over her. "No," he said. "I'm a survivor." The tail came down. After that, there were no more words. Only screams. Only wet tearing. Only the crackle of the dying fire. Avery stood in the center of the clearing while the creatures fed around him. Blood darkened the dirt. Torn blankets, shoes, and pieces of clothing lay scattered near the benches. The largest creature eventually lifted its head. Its mouth and chest were covered in blood. It crawled toward Avery. The boy did not move. The creature stopped inches away from him. Its wet breath touched his face. The smell was worse than he remembered. For a moment, Avery wondered whether it would break their agreement. Then the creature lowered its head. Not in hunger, in recognition. Avery reached out and placed one hand on its cold, pale skin. "A deal is a deal," he whispered. The creature turned and dragged itself back toward the lake. The smaller shapes followed, pulling what remained of the campers behind them. Within minutes, the clearing was quiet again. Avery looked at the dying campfire. By morning, he would tell the counselors that something had attacked them. He would say he had hidden beneath one of the benches. He would cry. He would shake. He would become the only survivor of another terrible Camp Echo Wood tragedy. People would believe him. They had believed him before. Avery pulled his hood over his head and watched the last orange coal turn black. From the lake came a deep, satisfied wheeze. Avery smiled. Next summer, the creature would be hungry again. Story 5. Something strange happened one night while I was driving home from work. Even now, after everything that has happened, I still remember every small detail of that drive. I remember the lights in the parking lot, the empty road, the sound of my car engine, and the exact tone of fear in Jessica's voice when she called me. It should have been a normal night. I had made the same drive home hundreds of times before. I was working late, as usual, and by the time I finished, almost everyone else had already left. The office was quiet. The lights in most of the building had been turned off, and the parking lot outside was nearly empty. My coworker, Jeff, was the only other person still there. He was gathering his things when I grabbed my jacket and car keys. "See you tomorrow," I said. Jeff looked up from his desk and waved. "Drive safe," he replied. Good night. I walked outside, unlocked my car, and sat behind the wheel. I was tired, but not unusually tired. My commute was only about 30 minutes, so it was never too bad. There was usually very little traffic that late at night. I only had to pass through 2 traffic lights before reaching the long country road that led toward my house. Once I reached that road, there were almost no buildings, no streetlights, and very little phone reception. It was mostly fields, trees, and empty darkness on both sides. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. Before I reached the first traffic light, my phone began ringing. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. The call was from Jessica. Jessica was my ex-girlfriend. We had dated for almost 3 years, but we had not spoken in nearly a year. Our breakup had not been violent or dramatic, but it had been painful. After everything ended, we both decided it would be better if we stopped talking completely. She had never called me since. For a moment, I thought the number might have been saved incorrectly, or maybe she had called me by accident. I considered letting it ring, but something about receiving a call from her so late at night made me nervous. I was also glad the call came before I reached the country road. Once I got out there, I would lose reception until I arrived home. I pulled over near the side of the road and answered. Before I could even say hello, Jessica started speaking. "Please, you need to help me," she said. Her voice sounded breathless and terrified. "I can't reach anyone else. I need you to pick me up at the Cypress Street bus station as soon as you can get here." "Jessica?" I said. "What happened?" The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, confused. Then I immediately called her back. The phone rang several times, but she did not answer. I called again. Still nothing. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to understand what was happening. It made no sense. Why would she call me after almost a year? Why would I be the only person she could reach? And if she was truly in danger, why had she not called the police? Maybe her phone battery had died. Maybe someone was chasing her. Maybe she was hurt. I could not ignore the call. Even though we had broken up, I still cared about what happened to her. If she really needed help, and I drove away, I knew I would never forgive myself. I turned the car around and headed towards Cypress Street. It was not too far from where I worked, but it was in the opposite direction from my house. Cypress Street was part of an older section of town. There were several closed shops, a few apartment buildings, and a bus route that ran through the area during the day. At night, the place was almost completely empty. I drove slowly along the street, looking for a bus stop. I passed one shelter that was empty, then another. Finally, near the end of the road, I saw a small bus station beneath a flickering streetlight. Someone was sitting there. As I got closer, I recognized her. It was Jessica. She sat alone on the bench beneath the shelter. She was wearing a large, dark coat, and her hands were hidden inside the sleeves. Her shoulders were shaking slightly, as though she was freezing, even though the night was not especially cold. I felt relieved when I saw her. At least she was alive. There was no one standing near her. I did not see any cars parked nearby or anyone watching from the shadows. She did not appear to be in immediate danger. I pulled up beside the curb and lowered the window. "Jess?" I called. She did not react. She remained seated, staring at the road in front of her. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Maybe the woman only looked like Jessica from a distance. I felt embarrassed and almost drove away. Then her head suddenly turned toward me. The movement was quick and unnatural, as if she had only just noticed that I was there. She looked directly at me. Her expression was strange. She seemed confused, almost as though she had forgotten where she was. Her eyes moved across my face slowly, studying me. Then she stood. She walked toward the car with small, stiff steps. I called out again. "What's wrong, Jess? Are you okay?" She stopped beside the passenger door. "Did you just need a ride?" I asked. "I don't think the red line comes through this late on a Thursday. You sounded really scared when you called. I tried calling you back, but you didn't answer." She continued staring at me. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her face changed. A smile slowly appeared, as if she had suddenly remembered something pleasant. "Oh," she said softly. "Thank you." Her voice sounded different from the voice I had heard on the phone. It was slower and less natural, almost as though she had to think carefully about each word before speaking. "I'm not sure how I got here," she continued. "Please take me home." She opened the passenger door and climbed inside. The way she moved immediately made me uncomfortable. She was not walking like a drunk person, but something seemed wrong with her body. Each step looked painful and unbalanced, as though her joints were stiff or her bones did not fit together properly. Still, her face showed no sign of pain. Once she sat down, she pulled the door closed and turned toward me. For the first time, I noticed how pale she looked. I tried to ignore the feeling of fear growing inside me. We had been together for 3 years. I knew Jessica well. I knew how she spoke, how she smiled, and how she moved. I told myself she might be in shock. Maybe she had been attacked. Maybe she had taken something. Or perhaps she had suffered a head injury. I gave her a nervous smile. She smiled back, but it was not quite right. It looked like half a smile and half a painful grimace. "So, where do you need to go?" I asked. She did not answer. She sat facing me, smiling faintly. Her eyes remained fixed on mine. At first, I waited patiently. Then 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then nearly 30. The longer she stared, the more uncomfortable I became. It felt as if she were not looking at a person. It felt as though she were studying an object she had never seen before. I cleared my throat. "Jessica?" She did not blink. "Where do you need to go?" I asked again. "Why did you call me?" Her eyes moved slightly. "Called you?" she repeated. "I called you?" She looked confused again. "Yes," I said. "You called me and asked me to pick you up." She turned her head toward the windshield. "Home," she whispered. "Take me home with you. I need help." Her eyes became wet, and for a moment, she looked ready to cry. That small sign of fear made me feel guilty for being suspicious. Whatever had happened, she was clearly not okay. I pulled away from the curb and began driving. I decided to head in the general direction of my house while trying to learn more about what had happened. If she wanted to go somewhere else, she could tell me along the way. For several minutes, she said nothing. She looked out of the passenger window at the dark buildings passing by. Then, whenever she thought I was not watching, she turned and stared at me again. I could see her reflection in the glass. Each time I looked toward her, she quickly faced the window. It made my skin crawl. We had spent years together, but the way she watched me felt completely unfamiliar. She looked at me as if I were some strange animal she had found and was trying to understand. Finally, I could not take the silence anymore. "What actually happened tonight?" I asked. "Why were you at the bus station?" She turned toward me, her head tilted slightly to the side. It reminded me of a bird watching something before attacking it. "I was," she began. She paused for a long time. "I was attacked." "Attacked by who?" "Someone caught me," she said. "Someone hurt me." "Are you injured?" She looked down at her hands, which were still hidden inside the sleeves of her coat. "I will get help tomorrow," she said. Tonight, I needed a face, a familiar face. The way she said the word face disturbed me. It did not sound like something Jessica would say. I nodded and kept my eyes on the road. When I reached the turn that led toward my house, I drove past it. I did not want to take her home with me. Not yet. Something about her behavior felt wrong, and I wanted to understand what was happening before allowing her inside my house. As we continued driving, her body slowly relaxed. Her head leaned back against the seat, and her eyes closed. At first, I thought she had fallen asleep. Then, she began making strange noises. A low hissing sound came from her throat. It did not sound like snoring. It was too controlled, almost as though she were making the sound on purpose. I glanced at her. Her mouth was slightly open, but her face was completely still. Maybe she had suffered a serious head injury. Confusion, strange speech, and unusual movements could all be signs that something was wrong with her brain. I decided I should take her to the hospital. I turned at the next intersection and began heading back into town. She remained in the same strange sleep. Several times I became worried because I could not hear her breathing. I watched her chest, but it did not seem to move. Then, without warning, she released a long breath and made another wet, hissing sound. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The dark country road seemed longer than usual. There were no other vehicles, and the trees on both sides looked like a solid wall of blackness. I kept driving until the lights of town appeared in the distance. The moment my phone regained service, it began vibrating. Once, then again. Then, several more times. Messages were arriving one after another. I glanced down quickly. They were from Jessica. My first thought was that she was playing some strange joke. Maybe she had secretly used her phone while pretending to sleep, but her hands were still hidden beneath the sleeves of her coat, and her body had not moved. I slowed the car. The road ahead was empty, so I pulled closer to the side and picked up my phone. The first message had been sent shortly after I collected the woman from the bus stop. I opened it. "Where are you? Please, I need help. I can't say much, and you will think I'm crazy, but I can't go to the police. I just need to get out of here before it comes back. Something is after me." It looked like a police officer earlier. I saw it again, and I had to hide. It tried to kill me. After it attacked me, it changed. You have to believe me. It looks like me. I stopped breathing. My hands began to shake. I looked slowly toward the passenger seat. The woman beside me was still sleeping. Her head had fallen forward. Her dark hair covered part of her face. I looked back at the phone and opened the next message. "I'm sorry. I don't know where it went. I don't see you here. Please hurry." That message had been sent several minutes later. There was one final message. It had arrived only moments ago. "I need to leave. I hope you are okay. I'm sorry. I never should have asked you to come and get me tonight. I was just so scared. It is better if you stay away. It isn't safe. Forget I called you. Don't come here. If you see me waiting, turn around. I know it sounds insane, but it is not really me."